Hello.
Hey, John Sinclair.
Yeah, hi Jason, how are you?
Very good, very good.
Good.
So, John Sinclair here on the phone with me. What are you currently working on these days?
Well, I came out of I don't know how much you know of my background, but I retired from the touring business in 2003. And nowadays, really, I mean, you're probably going to ask me the reason why as well. I was actually 50 years old in 2003. And to be honest, Jason, I was just really tired of the road. You know, you get to the point where you're just exhausted. And really, all I do now, I have a studio at home. I live on the edge of Loch Ness in Scotland. And I just record. I write and record in my own time. Most of the work I do these days is centered around therapy more than anything else. I'm a qualified therapist these days. I work with a lot of young people who have drug and alcohol-related problems, and now and again, there are bands and artists that sort of like take my interest, but it's not a professional thing for me anymore. So I can pretty much pick and choose, the projects I work on, and I'm not really sort of obligated, if you know what I'm saying. So I can take my time over projects, just do the things I really like. I have a really nice house now, and I have to say it's a very happy and relaxed world up here, For instance, Joe Lalonde's project, that's exactly the kind of thing I'll do. You're probably going to ask me about that, I guess, at some point.
Yeah, you worked on the Blizzards from Oz CD with Joe Lalonde. How did that process work?
Yeah. I think it came through Bob Daisley originally. I think Joe had been talking to Bob, and Bob hooked Joe up with me. And obviously, I suppose, the fact that I played with Ozzy for about 17 years, it kind of adds some credibility to what Joe's doing. And from what I heard, he's doing a great job, Are you actually a friend of Joe's, Jason?
Yeah, I've been pushing his projects for a little while and haven't met him in person, but yeah, I keep contact with him on the internet, and he's doing super great work. How did the work on the CD come apart? Was it through the internet?
Yeah. He just, that's one of the most amazing things nowadays, Jason. You can just, I have projects that I do, and there are mastering rooms down in London, and I can just literally, in fact, I emailed some stuff down to London earlier on, and, you can work with experienced engineers, which I'm not really. Obviously, I'm a keyboard player. And you can work with really experienced audio engineers and just email stuff backwards and forwards, which is one of the good things that technology has brought. I think there's a lot of bad things, but that's actually one of the good things.
I guess so, because you can work with a guy that's in Canada, New Brunswick, Canada, and you're in Scotland. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So Joe just sent me sort of some of the rough mixes with just sort of, a rough mix with his vocal and so on. And I just sort of put the keyboards on this end and then emailed in the stuff back. So like you, Jason, I've never met Joe, but I've kept in fairly close contact. And we kind of talked about the sort of work we're both doing. And obviously there are some similarities between what Joe's doing and what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome how collaboration can be put upon this internet world, and have
that's right.
The legendary John Sinclair on a product, in Canada.
Legendary. I like that word.
You like that one?
I like that one. I wouldn't say I was that legendary. I'm covered in coal at the moment. I was just out lighting the fires, so I don't look much like a legend at this point.
You've sure lived the life of a legend, playing 17 years with Ozzy Osbourne. Of course, you're in the secret background as the keyboard player. That's legendary also, because there's not much showcase.
I think, no, it's, to be honest, as you said it, the secret background, it's funny because I've been asked along, about that over the years. And to be honest, I think you have to accept, as a keyboard player, when I was 5 years old, and that was 1958, I was a young, enthusiastic musician, and it just happened to be the thing I picked up was piano. But I think you have to accept over the years, especially if you're in the rock and roll business, that, people really don't play air keyboards. It's just as simple as that, people are guitar fanatics. They associate the guitar with rock music, and it's just the way it is. And I think unless you accept that, so I mean, it never bothered me really that I was in the background. I mean, if it bothered you, it'd drive you nuts because I mean, obviously you're never going to get the attention that a guitarist or a sort of a bass player, a drummer, or a singer will, because keyboards, to a large extent, are secondary in rock music. And if you don't accept that, then really, I mean, you're setting yourself up for a lifetime of heartache, I think. Yeah, but really, if you think about it, I mean, how many sort of like name keyboard players or legendary keyboard players are there? And then how many legendary guitar players are there?
A lot more guitar players.
Well, there's loads of guitar players, right throughout history. I mean, to be honest, I often wonder where all the new ones are. There doesn't seem to be that many new ones. It sometimes seems as though, Zach, for instance, he's almost the last generation of guitar heroes. There don't seem to be many since sort of his period. And of course, Zach's in his 40s now,
Can we go a little bit on the Ozzy Osbourne projects there?
Sure.
Starting with The Ultimate Sin. Now, you are not on the album?
No, I wasn't on the album, Jason. That was the year I joined. The album was just finished. And Shot in the Dark, obviously, was in the charts in the UK. And essentially, I joined for that tour in 1986. And we toured the States, and obviously I think it was Metallica's first major tour.
That's correct.
Metallica were on the bill. And that probably would have been their beginning of their Master of Puppets tour. And so I didn't play that album, but I just joined up for the tour, the live part.
And then your next album would have been, well, since you weren't on The Ultimate Sin, you would have been on No Rest for the Wicked, correct?
I was on No Rest for the Wicked, yeah.
Just Say Ozzy, the live concert, you were on that?
Yeah. No, I wasn't. No, I didn't do that one.
So
I'll tell you what happened there, Jason, was I think that was around 1990, wasn't it?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. They were off the road. The band was off the road, and I said to Sharon, obviously I needed to work. Ozzy wasn't going out on tour. And essentially, what happened, the Cult had just broken with Sonic Temple. And they sort of like, the Sonic Temple album had broken in a big way. They had big singles like Firewoman, Sweet Soul Sister, and so on. And they were looking for a keyboard player, once again, not to join the band, but to go out and actually tour with them and promote the Sonic Temple album. So I was actually on loan from Ozzy's band because he was off the road, and I was away. So I think it was I was away doing the Cult tour I was going out with the Cult for about 18 months, 2 years, something like that. And during that time, Ozzy did that album. So I was already committed to doing the Cult.
Just Say Ozzy was recorded in 1989, so you would have not been with Ozzy at that time?
No, it must have been, you must be right, Jason. It must have been 1989, I would think, yeah. I mean, it was around that. I know it was the same time as I was out on tour with the Cult, so that would make sense. And to be honest, I've got to say, Jason, some of my memories and dates. I mean, Bob Daisley right now is writing his book, I think, and I admire him actually because I think I'd have a real job trying to tie together some of the dates. Because things back in those days were a bit of a blur, if you know what I mean.
Time's passing.
So, I mean, I'm not absolutely sure of the order of events. And I think 1990 was the Moscow Peace Festival.
Right.
And I would think that must have been...
1989 it would have been.
It's not 1989, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Just Say Ozzy, but the album was released in 1990.
Oh, it was released in 1990. So I think the Moscow Peace Festival was 1990, and I was with Ozzy for that.
Okay, then...
So I must have been back with him by that time.
Then there's a good chance you're in Just Say Ozzy.
I don't think I was. I'm pretty sure I wasn't. Was it?
I'll look into it more. I have a lot of Ozzy dates and stuff.
You must check that for me, Jason, and let me know, because I can't remember.
No,
yeah, that would be great.
I'll help you out with your history. No More Tears. Now you're on that one.
No More Tears, yeah.
And then Live and Loud, the 1993 question mark here. Are you or are you
Live
not?
and Loud, no. Maybe that's... I'll tell you what, Jason, maybe that's the one I'm thinking about. Live and Loud, I definitely wasn't.
Okay, that one I can confirm you're probably not on that one.
I think it was that was the one I was thinking. Those two, perhaps I'm getting mixed up.
Yeah, Just Say Ozzy was the little EP right after No Rest for the Wicked.
Mm-hmm.
It's just got the graffiti on the walls, just say Ozzy. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, I didn't do that. I think it was a guy called Kevin Jones, who was an old friend of, that must have been when I was out with the Colt.
I do believe
So that would have, whenever that was, yeah, that was a guy called Kevin Jones. He was a good guy. He was a friend of Randy Castillo, Ozzy's old drummer.
Osmosis, are you on this one?
No.
Down to Earth.
No, I didn't do that one either.
Okay, then you rejoined in 2000?
Yeah, no, well, not really. I've seen that on the internet. I was actually with him through most of the 90s.
Because
For some reason, I don't know where that story came out that I rejoined in 2000, because actually I was working with Ozzy through most of the 90s. Really, that 2-year period, about 2 years that I was out with the Colt, 1989. So actually, no, I was pretty much there through the 90s, live anyway.
Brian Tishy, you remember him playing drums in Ozzy?
Yeah, I do. He was a friend of Zach's.
Right, well, he recalls you playing keyboard in 2000 with him in Ozzy Osbourne group.
That's right, but I was playing keyboards before that. So I was actually through the 90s, because I was in the band, let me see, I was in the band with Joe Holmes. I'm trying to think when that was. That was in the 90s.
Yeah, 96.
There you go. So I was in that band. I toured right the way through with Joe Holmes.
And then you would have done Live at Budokan.
Yep.
And that would have been your last Ozzy Osbourne album, correct?
That was, Jason. That's right.
So how was it playing with Joe Holmes in those days in the early mid-90s?
It was really good, Jason. To be honest, I don't know how much you know about Joe. He was actually taught, or at least he was sort of like, to some extent, he was taught by Randy Rhoads.
Yeah.
And he's kept very strictly to sort of like Randy's style and emulated Randy Rhoads' playing. So because I never played with Randy Rhoads, obviously I never knew him. I was in Uriah Heep in those days, in the early days of the Ozzy band. It was, that's one area I kind of missed out on. I'd love to have played with Randy Rhoads, but never did. But Joe was actually sort of, a big Randy Rhoads fan and really emulated him closely. And he's a great guy. I mean, have you spoken to Joe?
Never spoke to Joe in my life, no. Now, you've played with Uriah Heep, with Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley, from 81 to 85. Is
that what it was?
Yeah,
to me. Sounds about right, yeah.
And from there on, is that where you get your connection to join Ozzy Osbourne?
Yeah, I mean, the story goes that sort of like, by 85, the story was that sort of the connection was obviously that Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley were in Uriah Heep with me. Bob had gone back with Ozzy.
Right.
And to be honest, at the time, I didn't feel Uriah Heep was sort of like doing much, and obviously financially, I needed the money, I had a family and so forth. And Bob recommended me to Ozzy and said that he'd work with a guy that would work well in his band. And Bob apparently told Ozzy that sort of, I know a keyboard player who drinks as much as you do. And Ozzy said, right, he's got the job. And I think that was the audition, Jason. That was.
And that was a true legendary story by John Sinclair. That's awesome. That is so classic.
Well, apparently that's how it went. That's what I heard at the time. And I didn't really, in 1986 when I joined up for the Ultimate Sin tour, or the end of 1985, whenever it was, I don't actually remember it being an audition. I just sort of turned up and the gear was set up and I started playing and I was there. Then I was there. I was part of the furniture then.
Now, did you drink a lot of alcohol in 1986?
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Really, really bad. That's one of the reasons why sort of nowadays, I focus on, because of the background I had. I've been straight now since the beginning of the 90s, around 1990. I wouldn't say I sort of totally sort of conquered it in 1990. It was quite a slow, hard business to sort of actually beat the booze. But that's one of the reasons why now, I focus on that area quite strongly, is obviously because of my own experience of it. and obviously the drugs as well in the early days on the road. So I'd say absolutely, yeah. I mean, Uriah Heep were a sort of a hard drinking band as well, so I fitted in just fine. And I got really bad with the drink. I mean, I would say it nearly killed me, you know.
Well, that's quite a classic story when you have to be, an alcoholic to join a band. And, back in them days.
I know. I don't know how true it is. That's why it's a good story anyway. But that's what I was told at the time.
I believe it.
I can imagine Ozzy saying that, actually.
I really believe it because the stories for Brad Gillis.
Oh, yeah. No, tell me.
Well, Brad Gillis basically went to a hotel room and Ozzy was almost passed out. And he looked at Brad. He says, "Can you play?" He said, "Yeah, all right, you're in the band." Nothing more than that.
That's probably true.
It's
probably true then, Jason.
And your story that you can consume as much as Ozzy, guaranteed. That's why you got the job.
Right. He just said, right, he's got the job. He hadn't even met me at that stage.
Yeah.
Well, he had. I mean, we used to, when I was in Uriah Heep, Ozzy used to turn up sometimes and sort of hang out at the pub. But actually, on a working level, I don't think he knew much about what I did or what I was like or who I was or anything. So that was probably what clinched it.
Do you recall Greg Deckert in the Uriah Heep keyboards before
No,
you?
I didn't work with Greg. That was before me. And to be honest, at that time it was interesting because Uriah Heep really, you probably know, if you know anything about the history of Uriah Heep, I mean, they were kind of legendary in the early 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And they were up there. I mean, they were contenders for the sort of like the Deep Purple level.
Right.
In those days, Deep Purple and Uriah Heep were sort of, pretty much put in the same category. And I was a big fan of the band. But what had happened since the early 70s, I mean, obviously the band has sort of pretty much gone downhill. I mean, they'd lost a lot of popularity. And there were a number of lineups were put together by the record company to try and sort of really, I suppose, sort of get back some of the, just get back some of the investment. They were trying to keep the name going. And so there were a number of lineups put together and a number of members. So there's been a lot of members in Uriah Heep over the years. But I mean, to give you an idea of what Uriah Heep was about in those days, I mean, if you're familiar with Spinal Tap,
oh yeah,
it was the U.S. Air Force Base scene in Spinal Tap came from a direct Uriah Heep gig, which Bob Daisley and I played. Well, we did a gig just for the money. We had a night off. And we were booked into this United States Air Force base, and it literally was just like the scene from Spinal Tap. So when I did the first Spinal Tap, the original Spinal Tap album, I was talking to the guys, and Christopher Guest, who plays Nigel Tufnell, said to me, "What's the worst gig you ever played?" And it was that one. And they made a note of it, and it wound up in the movie. So that's not just my story, Jason. You can validate that on the Spinal Tap website.
And is it completely true that the guitar was picking up signals at your gig of the Uriah?
No, I think that was I think that was sort of a little extra they put in. But it was about as embarrassing as it was in the Spinal Tap movie, I have to say. And when we turned up, I seem to remember the poster. We turned up at this gig, and the poster said had the picture of a Abominog, which was the sort of like the main album. I did 3 albums with Uriah Heep, but Abominog was probably the one that got the most publicity,
right,
and was the most recognised, and it probably sold the most as well. But I remember turning up at the gig, and there was like an orange poster outside with the Abominog picture, which is like kind of a devil face on the front, and it said the Uriah Heep Show. And then underneath it said, sold second only to ABBA in popularity. Well, that's how it had been advertised.
That is
you
funny.
You can imagine. So we went on stage, I think a lot of the sort of servicemen and their wives were expecting a band that was second to ABBA in popularity, and they got a bit of a shock.
And then we're going to be hearing Easy Living.
I know. You can imagine. I mean, literally, I've never known a show like it. Everybody in the place, the guys were in uniform, and the women were in evening dress. you know, long flowing dresses. And we just kicked off, Jason, and this whole crowd just hit the back wall and stayed there, and there was silence for the whole show.
That's
I know, well, it's, you know, we were, I mean, in a sense at that time, because we were, I mean, you can see the sort of connection, how sort of like the Spinal Tap guys were fascinated with sort of like stories like that, because really, we were on, you know, Uriah Heep had been a really big band, and then we really were on, you know, sort of like bad times in a way. I suppose that was where they took the interest in sort of like, I mean, Uriah Heep as a band, I mean, wasn't the model for Spinal Tap, that's for sure. I mean, Uriah Heep's been a great band over the years. But, I mean, it's just that period, probably. I mean, you know, being so big in the early 70s. And then, really, we were just sort of just trying to do the best we could just to survive at that point, you know. All right, Jason, it's good talking to you, mate.
So don't be a stranger, and we'll keep in touch.
You take care, Jason.
You too. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye now.